position. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today for a very exciting announcement. We have many guests here today, and you'll be hearing from in a moment. I'd like to welcome Kathleen Rice, District Attorney of Nassau County, and Bob Johnson from the Bronx, Cyrus Vance from New York County, some would just say Manhattan, Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, Assemblyman Hakeem Jeffries is with us, Speaker Sheldon Silver, Assemblyman Keith Wright, and Council Mylan Dennerstein. I'll turn it over to Mylan first to open up today's presentation. Mylan?
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, after me, you'll be hearing from District Attorney Cy Vance, New York City Police Commissioner Ray Kelly, Assemblyman Hakeem Jeffries, and Speaker Sheldon Silver, and of course, finally, Governor Cuomo. Today, Governor Cuomo will be proposing legislation that will make possession of small amounts of marijuana, 25 grams or less, in public a finable offense, subject to the maximum fine of $100 instead of subject to being a Class B misdemeanor. The Marijuana Reform Act, signed by Governor Hugh Carey in 1977, states that private possession of the same amount of marijuana is currently a finable offense. So if you possess it in private, 25 grams or less, it's now a fine. This legislation would mean that the penalty for public possession of small amounts, whether in private or in public, would be the same. The proposed legislation would mean that New York would be comparable in handling small quantities of marijuana as several other states, including, for example, California, Ohio, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. To be clear, it would remain a misdemeanor to smoke or burn marijuana in public, and of course, to sell marijuana would still remain a crime. In the years since the passage of the law in 1977, arrests for possession of small amounts of marijuana have jumped from approximately less than 2,000 in 1990 to over 53,000 today. Today, most of the arrests occur in the New York City area. That's 94% for last year. The increasing emphasis on marijuana arrest has a disproportionate impact on minority youth. Over 50% were under the age of 25 years, and 82% were either Black or Hispanic for last year. And of those approximately 53,000 arrests, less than 10% were ultimately convicted of a crime. The governor's proposal will instill a sense of fairness and equality in our penal law by simply making the penalty the same for the same act.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. The most important job of district attorneys is to enhance public safety while maintaining an unwavering commitment to the fair and the just administration of law. The prosecutors in our office in Manhattan and the police officers we work with every day at the NYPD are trying our best to accomplish those dual goals. But one of the challenges that we face, especially in this time of limited resources, is to make sure, as much as possible, that we are focusing our resources on the most significant criminals and crime problems in Manhattan. In Manhattan, we work closely with the community, of course with the NYPD, and what we call intelligence-based prosecution to focus on criminals and organizations that cause a disproportionate amount of violence to our communities. Working with the commissioner, for example, and the mayor, we are identifying and dismantling some of the most violent drug trafficking crews in Manhattan, and we intend to continue to do so. Our joint commitment is to work closely with law enforcement and community partners to reduce violent crime and to improve the quality of life for all of our communities in a fair and in a smart manner. And this is why I support Governor Cuomo's proposed changes to the laws governing the possession of marijuana. This simple and fair change will help us redirect significant resources to the most serious criminals and crime problems, and frankly, it's the right thing to do. The consequences for someone who possesses a small amount of marijuana should be the same whether the marijuana is in a person's pocket or in their hand. I don't think it's a fair or effective criminal justice policy to say that just because the marijuana is in public view rather than a pocket, a person faces the possibility of a criminal conviction. And the numbers speak for themselves. Of the roughly 6,200 people charged with open to public view criminal possession of marijuana in Manhattan in 2011, half had never been arrested before, and approximately 46% were between the ages of roughly 16 to 24. Many of these defendants were held in jail before they were arraigned by a judge, a cold introduction to the criminal justice system. The human cost to each one of these people and their families is serious, and it is real. And the drain of resources in our office and to the NYPD to process those 6,000 cases is significant. I don't make this recommendation lightly. Fighting drug crime, particularly violent drug markets, in New York is a top priority of our office and a leading concern among residents and community leaders. But this new law will allow us to redirect resources away from processing people charged with simple, low-level possession of marijuana and use those valuable resources to fight violent crime, to make all of our communities safer and thereby enhance public safety. This is a just application of common sense and fundamental fairness. Thank you, Governor, for your continued leadership in striking the right balance between public safety and fairness, which is the goal of all of us in law enforcement.
Governor, thank you for inviting me today. During several appearances that I've made at the City Council in New York City, I was asked to respond to criticisms by some members of the council that the police department was making, quote, too many arrests for small amounts of marijuana. And my response to them was, well, your option is to go to Albany and get the law changed. Better than that, than having police officers, New York City police officers, turned a blind eye to the law as it was written and as it is still written. And there were allegations that we were erroneously charging people who were arrested for marijuana when they were producing it as a result of direction on a part of a police officer. So to reduce the confusion in this matter, we issued an operations order last September that reminded police officers how the law should be applied. It stated that misdemeanor arrests will not be made for the situations where the marijuana is produced at the direction of a police officer. Now, this law will make certain that the confusion in this situation will be eliminated. And it also mandates that a violation will be charged, irrespective, as the district attorney says, whether or not the marijuana is in plain sight or not. So it makes the question of an arrest moot. And quite frankly, it will make the application of this law much clearer. It comports to the spirit of the operations order that we put out. And I think it's a balanced approach, and it's significant that it supports our quality of life efforts in that smoking it in public or burning it is still a misdemeanor, it's still a crime. And I want to make certain, because there was some misinformation on this. Mayor Bloomberg totally supports this legislation. He hopes that it passes in this session, as do I. Governor, again, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Governor Cuomo, for your tremendous leadership in this area of criminal justice reform and fairness and equity as it relates to our law. I also, of course, want to thank Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver, who's been a consistent voice and force within the legislature to advance significant issues of criminal justice reform as we are today. And I, of course, also applaud our district attorneys and certainly Police Commissioner Kelly for his willingness to support this change in law. The statute, as currently written, unnecessarily subjects tens of thousands of people to criminal arrest and prosecution for the possession of very small quantities of marijuana. These arrests, of course, have significant consequences that can be damaging and life-altering. It can prevent you from getting a job. It can stop you from getting into college. It can prevent you from receiving certain forms of financial aid. It can stop you from living in public housing. It can even, in certain circumstances, prevent you from being able to keep your child in family court. These arrests have significant life-altering consequences. The overwhelming majority of people who have been arrested as a result of the way that the statute is currently written come from the Black and Latino community. Even though statistics and studies consistently show that marijuana possession and use is far more racially diverse. In fact, there are some studies that have shown that affluent younger whites use marijuana in equal, if not greater, numbers. And so we're here today to support a change in law that would make the statute and the criminal justice system fairer and certainly more equitable. The possession of small quantities of marijuana is either a crime or it's not. But it cannot be criminal behavior for one group of people and socially acceptable behavior for another group of people when the dividing line is race. That is why I applaud the governor for his leadership in spearheading a change in statute that will allow for a fairer, more equitable, more even-handed application of the law.
Thank you, Senator. Speaker?
Thank you. The governor is proposing this afternoon is a logical and unfortunately necessary clarification of the law as it exists today. It is, and has always been, the intent of the legislature to make possession of less than 25 grams of marijuana a violation and not a crime. Under the leadership of the chair of our Codes Committee, Assemblyman Joe Lenthal, along with several caucus members, including Hakeem Jeffries, Jeff Aubrey, Assemblymember Camara, and Assemblyman Keith Wright, the Assembly conducted roundtables on this issue, where it became clear that marijuana possession was being used, regrettably, to permanently scar and taint the records of thousands of young citizens, predominantly people of color, who otherwise had no record of prior criminal conviction. It is excessive on its face, and we are addressing the issue thoughtfully and swiftly. I applaud Assemblyman Jeffries for his leadership, both in calling attention to the situation and for his efforts in crafting legislation to remedy it. I applaud our distinguished district attorneys and Commissioner Kelly for coming together under the leadership of the governor in bringing about a resolution of the injustices here. I must applaud the governor for taking up this issue, for bringing all of these parties together, as he has done so successfully on a number of issues. And I hope that together, all of us can convince the Senate that this is the right thing to do.
Well said. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank all of you. I think that the topic has been very well covered. I understand the intent of the law in 1977 and what Governor Carey was intending to do and the legislature was intending to do. That is not the current effect of the law. There's a blatant inconsistency. If you possess marijuana privately, it's a violation. If you show it in public, it's a crime. It's incongruous. It's inconsistent the way it's been enforced. There have been additional complications in relation to the stop and frisk policy, where there's claims that young people could have a small amount of marijuana in their pocket. During the stop and frisk, the police officer says, "Turn out your pockets." The marijuana is now in public view. It just went from a violation to a crime, to a possible misdemeanor. And as Assemblyman Jeffries pointed out, the effect of a criminal conviction on a young person can alter the trajectory of your entire life. There's no going back. This is a primarily New York City problem, 94% of the arrests. Primarily a young person problem, about 60%. And primarily, overwhelmingly, a problem for the black and brown community, 94% of the convictions. So those numbers are telling, and those numbers are stark. Commissioner Kelly's response to the New York City Council, I think, was right. The problem is the law, and the solution is change the law. You can't ask a police officer to enforce the laws the police officer chooses to enforce, but not enforce laws that the police officer doesn't feel like enforcing. The job of the police isn't to enforce all the laws. If society doesn't like some of the laws, then you change the laws. That's exactly what we're doing today. Long overdue, but we're doing it today. I want to thank Commissioner Kelly for his collegiality, his partnership, and his help on this issue. The Commissioner and I go way back to a different lifetime when we were in Washington together, believe it or not. So it's a pleasure to work with him again, and especially on an effort that comes to such a productive conclusion. Assemblyman Jeffries, who's been working on this issue for many, many months, as the people in Albany know. The Assemblyman can be a tenacious advocate. I can tell you that firsthand because I've been on the other side of the table. But he can also bring people together to actually get something done. And that's what it's about at the end of the day, is getting something done. And the Assemblyman has done that once again here. Speaker Silver and the Assembly that orchestrated a conversation and the roundtables to heighten the attention on this issue. The district attorneys, Cy Vance, and all the New York City district attorneys who support this. As a matter of fact, all New York City district attorneys do support it. Richard Brown, Joe Hines, Dan Donovan couldn't be with us today, but they also support this proposal. I want to thank Mayor Bloomberg for his support. PBA President Pat Lynch also supports it, as well as the Drug Policy Alliance, NYCLU, Legal Action Center, Bar Association, and the Bronx Defenders. I am hopeful for passage. We have not yet come to an agreement, obviously, with both houses of the legislature. We're just putting the proposal forward, but we'll work very hard to see if we can come up with a piece of legislation that's actually passed this session. So I thank you all for that. Again, we'll take questions on this topic for myself or any of our colleagues.
Governor, have you spoken to Dean Scales about this, and what was his reaction to it?
We have had generic conversations, Ken, but we haven't gone through the details of it and the exact law change. We've talked about the construct of the problem, and I think it's fair to say that he understands the problem and he's sympathetic to the problem. We haven't talked through the actual changes to the penal law that we think are the remedy.
Is it harder, though, in an election year, particularly the issue where some people, might say, well, you're taking a step toward legalization of marijuana?
Ken, are most things more difficult in an election year? Yes, because the sensitivity is up higher and the possibility that people are going to demagogue or politicize an issue. So yes, it is more difficult in the election year. I don't believe that the election year is going to be such an obstacle that it can't be overcome. And I think this is an issue that people get, especially in terms of stop and frisk. I mean, look at what you're saying. Young person has a small amount of marijuana in their pocket, and that's a violation. That's a fine. Police officer says, turn out your pockets, and now it's a crime. I mean, who could defend against that? So, and look at the damage you're doing to young people.
But Governor, it's already been addressed directly by the police commissioner. Why do this now? Why do this legislatively?
Because there's nothing more effective than changing the law. I understand the police commissioner's directive. I understand that, first, I think it puts the police in an awkward position to tell them, enforce some laws, don't enforce other laws. And I think that's a bad precedent, frankly, in general. It's not the job of the police. They're not going to cherry pick which laws they pass. And then you'd be subject to an administrative procedure, and what did a police officer hear, and what did the police officer not hear? This is nice and clean. Change the law, period. Now I don't care what the police do, because the law is the law.
Governor, what about the viewpoint that by enforcing these so-called minor offenses that you are preventing more major crimes from occurring? We saw in New York City when they went after fare jumpers and people like that, and they said that's preventing other more serious crimes from occurring.
Well, Kyle, you will see, it has been a violation to have a small amount of marijuana in your private possession. It will continue to be a violation, whether it's in your pocket or in public view. So it's the same sanction will continue.
Governor, did you consider also decriminalizing burning or smoking marijuana in public? Any of the speakers up there want to talk about why you're keeping that a misdemeanor?
Yes, and I'll turn it over to the other speakers. My determination was burning, smoking is different. And therefore, this does not affect smoking marijuana, which will still be a crime. And I believe there's a distinction. I know some of my colleagues had a different opinion, and there are different versions of the bill. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, I would just
Hakeem?
add that this is a significant and tremendous step in the right direction. It's the most appropriate step that we can take at this moment, and there is a quantifiable difference as it relates to the two different behaviors that are at issue.
But why would it be a difference, Governor, in terms of someone who presumably is holding marijuana is either going to smoke it or sell it, so why wouldn't that be included?
It's a continuum, Ken. Presumably, if you had it in your pocket, you were intending to use it also at one time, right? So they're all points on the continuum, and the question is, when do you step in, and how do you classify each point
But you said
on the
it's
continuum?
different smoking or burning. Why, in your mind, is that different than just possessing it?
Because I believe if you are, the society does want to discourage the use of marijuana in public, on the street. Smoking a joint, I think, is a different level of activity than having it just being in possession of it.
Governor, some of the advocates for this bill, one of their biggest reasons they want it is because they say that this is one of the adverse effects of the high number of stops and frisks that the police department does. Did that enter into your mind at all in considering your movements to the high number of stops and frisks to NYPD?
Yes, as I said, I think the correlation, the complication with stop and frisk aggravates the situation. I think the law is flawed as it is, but I think it's aggravated by the stop and frisk scenario that I mentioned before, where legitimately a police officer can say, turn out your pockets, and the suggestion of the police officer transforms the action from a violation to a crime.
Would you like to see the NYPD change the way it implements stop and frisk and rate it with the
Well, I think this, in terms of stop and frisk, and again, this is a statewide law change, but I think this will actually help with the stop and frisk situation.
Do you feel that the police department has been excessive in their use of stop and frisk? The NYPD's use of stop and frisk?
You know, I'll leave that to the police commissioner and the community within New York City to determine. Stop and frisk is a well-accepted police strategy all across the country. It becomes a question of balance. Part of the balance is the relationship with the community. I think the NYPD and the mayor are making efforts to work with the community, because the relationship is also very important for the police, the relationship with the community. So I think it's all the balance and relationship issues.
Well, was this proposal, this legislation, a way of curtailing, without coming out against it, their use of stop and frisk?
No, I just think this was an aggravated complication for stop and frisk. Because think about it, Glenn, literally, I'll do it for the third time, police officer says, turn out your pockets, which is a common request. And now, there is the inadvertently created a more difficult situation for the young person and for the police officer.
What's the distinction that you draw between legislation that addresses this issue versus marijuana use for medicinal purposes, which you said you oppose?
I said I oppose the medical use of marijuana. I said it's a position and a situation that we are reviewing.
Do you feel that where you are right now, that this may change the way you're looking at medical marijuana? You said you're looking at it. Are you inching closer to medical marijuana perhaps?
I'm not inching. I'm not really an incher by definition. So by a footer, yarder, not really an incher. When we go just...
Is this helping move though in that direction perhaps?
I don't think so. This is a separate issue, the way we've dealt with it.
Do you see any inconsistency in the fact that New York City is moving towards banning sugary drinks but reducing penalties for marijuana?
Back to sugar, are we? As long as we're not on salt. On the sugar, on the mayor's sugar plan, it's created a fair amount of controversy. Some people have suggested that Albany should step in and pass legislation. I think the Speaker and I agree. I think that there's no need for the state to pass legislation to stop it. It's only a good thing. You're not hurting anyone, right? You're not. No harm is being done to a person by making them take 2 trips for soda. There are questions, is this government going too far? Is this the best way to do it? I think luckily we have something called democracy, which is going to intervene. And you have a new mayoral election that's coming up, and this will be a topic, I'm sure, during the mayoral election. And then the new mayor can decide whether or not to continue this policy or not. And it's just the stroke of a pen by the mayor, right? Because it's not a council vote, it's purely the whim of the mayor, the directive of the mayor. So if New Yorkers don't like it, I'm sure they'll tell the next mayor that, and the next mayor will eliminate it. In the meantime, no harm.
I'm going to excuse our participants, so I'm going to have to get back to New York City before we do.
Any other on-topic questions for the participants here?
Assemblyman Jeffries has spoke about the racial bias that was being implemented in this law. Do you think that fact is indicative of bias in NYPD policing?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the law created a situation based on the distinction between private possession and public view that resulted in sort of disparate racial consequences. The most significant thing that we can do to eliminate the distinction that has resulted in outcome of racial consequences is changing the law today.
Do you think that the state ought to be taking a broader look at public smoking and marijuana? Because we're talking about an issue in New York City, but upstate, whenever there's big mass gathering, rock concert, that sort of thing, people are smoking marijuana openly. And on state property, it's bad, for example, and nothing is done about it.
Well, so then we have to talk to the police. It's back. It's not a question of laws, that's a question of enforcement. And this law is a statewide law. I don't think we need more laws. Your point is we may need more enforcement. And that's a different topic. All right, I want to thank them very much again for being with us. Thank you, Governor.